Welcome to this virtual photo walk. I know a lot of us are stuck in our homes at the moment, wondering what to do with ourselves and unable to get out and take photographs for very long at least. So what I thought I'd do is I'd take you on a quick tour of Heber's Ghyll and Beck, which is near where I live, and I think it's a great location. And what I want to do is just to show you some pictures, take you on a journey, and maybe reflect on how a place can really help us relax and improve our mental health, which it does for me anyway. I think it's lovely. So let's go out on the photo walk and see what we can find. I'm just going to work out how to work the technology here, which isn't entirely easy, so I've got to click around a little bit to put things on the screen. So here we go. So this is the map of Ilkley, which is where I live, and the location is Heber's Ghyll, which is about 10 or 15 minutes walk away from central Ilkley. On the left hand side of the screen there you can see a red arrow pointing to the place where you can park your car if you're travelling by car and walk up the path of Heber's Ghyll. So let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, there's a closer picture of it. Interestingly, it's known as Heber's Ghyll, which I always thought was the name of the stream, but actually the stream is called Beck, and it's Heber's Ghyll Woods. So just before I show you some of the pictures, this is the camera I've been using. It's a big, bulky, old-fashioned camera, no automatic settings or anything like that, and it takes film, obviously. And it takes a long time to set up, and what this has done has helped me to really think about what I'm taking pictures of and slow down, because each photograph takes a while to get right, you know, adjusting the exposure and the shutter of the camera, setting up the tripod, working out where to set it up, and each picture costs a little bit of money, so you buy a roll of film. So you're not going to snap away, you want to save money all the time. So it really does focus your mind on what you're going to take pictures of. So that's what I've been using. And this is one of the first pictures I took with that particular camera. And it's home developed. You take the film out of the camera and you put it in a developing tank. And then I scan the images. And really I was astonished to see this first picture, because it's a medium format camera, big negatives, and when you scan them the detail is really rather impressive. So that was a great first attempt with this camera, taking a picture of the beautiful waterfalls. And of course, to get a picture like this you need to get quite close, so I always wear Wellington boots. I get right down in the stream. It is a bit hazardous and a bit slippery, but it's worth it if you can take care. So this is just an ordinary photograph of the road where you park your car. There's a bit of an old Victorian bridge there, which allows the stream Beck to run underneath the road. And then the road and then the path itself climbs up through the woods. It's quite steep and it's really not very good for people with disabilities, unfortunately. So having a virtual slideshow like this might enable some people to see it that wouldn't ordinarily get to go on this walk, but it is a great walk, and I hope you're able to. The path ascends up some rather slippery footpaths. It's a north-facing wood. It gets a lot of moss, a lot of damp, a lot of mud, so you really do have to be prepared for this walk. These pictures were taken at the height of the floods, when a lot of the rivers were flooding. A lot of towns in Yorkshire, in Calderdale, were flooding. Thankfully, Ilkley doesn't get flooded to the extent that homes are flooded, but it does get a lot of water through the valley, and this is when Beck was in full spate. Now this is another photograph taken with that big old Mamiya camera, and this is just enjoying some of the details of the ferns and the bark. And if you want a technical explanation, this was a thing called stand development. And the idea is that you take your pictures and then you put your film in the developing tank and you leave it for quite a long time without stirring it. And that way the bright parts of the picture don't develop as quickly as the shadows. So it enables you to get good detail in the shadows and the highlights. But it leaves the photograph looking a little bit flat, but it does bring out a lot of the detail. That's a little technical explanation. This was taken with a slightly different camera. It's another Mamiya film camera, a C330 F twin lens reflex camera, for those of you who are interested. But I just love the delicacy of the water and the solidness and heavy rocks. But of course it's always the water that wins, isn't it? It's the water that's crashing through the valley that actually disrupts and shapes the rocks. So I love the contrast between the dark rocks, the light water, and the energy and power of the water, which ultimately wins over the rocks. This one is getting right down into the stream, and I think what we do when we take photographs is we tend to stand in the obvious place, take a picture without really thinking, where can we stand, how close can we get, do we want to move right back or do we want to move right in and look at the details. And it was the fern that caught my eye on this one, and the rocks, because it's north facing, always are covered with this moss, and of course the moss itself provides a basis for other plants to grow. And right in the stream there are all these ferns and other bits of vegetation flourishing quite happily. This is stepping back a little bit, looking at those rocks with the ferns. I love that single rock balanced on one of the rocks in the mid-ground towards the right there. It does look like Niagara Falls, doesn't it? And it's probably not as impressive if you're standing high up, but when you get right down, standing in the water, that's the view you get. So one of the essential pieces of equipment is, of course, Wellington boots, and a lot of care, of course. This is another intimate angle, and getting the detail in the flow of the water requires a bit of experimentation, and the secret to this is the shutter speed. So this particular picture was taken with a 2-second shutter speed, which I identified as being, well, ideal for this kind of water, which gives these wonderful patterns as you see the water tumbling down. I quite like the balance in this. The water goes from left to right, top to bottom. There's a big heavy rock top right, and then that rock in the bottom corner, bottom left, for me balances the picture out. This one is another intimate scene, and really this one is about that rock in the middle, that dark, shiny rock, which is just being caressed by the water flowing down. That's more than 2 seconds. I think that was about 30 seconds exposure. The valley is quite dark, and if you are taking photographs, obviously the camera can be adjusted to brighten up the image, but this was a 30-second exposure. It was quite dim and gloomy in that particular place, but a 30-second exposure brightens the scene up considerably. That's very similar to the one I showed you before, just showing the water coming down around the rocks. This one is a negative. You can see the shape of the negative. It's tinted, so it's got a bit of toning on it, which I quite like. A brownish, almost sepia tone. And again, this is quite a long exposure, I think more than 30 seconds, which gives the water an even more creamy look. But you lose some of the interesting textures in the water by leaving it for so long. But that log trapped in the stream, I think that's the interest for me there. And you get these items that are out of place, things that have been drawn down the valley by the water that gets stuck, and I think that's quite interesting. And what I was beginning to see the longer I looked at the scene was the delicate little twigs. There's a little twig right in the middle on the left-hand side, which is just connecting that log to the vegetation on the left. That extreme delicacy has started to catch my eye, and that will come through in some of the other photographs that I'll show you. This one again was getting right down in the water, so I think it was probably getting quite wet, looking straight up. Now, a lot of the photographs that one would naturally take are from the bank, looking obliquely at the stream, but by getting down and right in the stream, looking up, I think that gives far more interesting photographs. This one again has one of those logs trapped at the top of the scene, but there's some interesting detail. Those little strands of water in the middle coming down are really quite delicate in contrast with the power of the water flowing down elsewhere. And this was in the middle of the floods, and the water to the right there is actually flowing down at an angle. It was flowing so quickly, and I think the water was generating turbulent air, which was moving the water around. It was really quite a powerful and energetic scene, this. You wouldn't necessarily get that in the photograph, but here I think there's an impression of that power coming through in the image and the movement. Again, we've got sticks trapped, which I think make it quite an interesting feature. Again, quite a long exposure, more than 30 seconds. This is where I'm trying to explore the delicacy of the scene. Again, a 2-second exposure here. And what I like about this is those branches just hanging over the water. Because of the wind and the turbulence, those pieces of vegetation are dancing around all the time. And in a way, the vegetation somehow catches the direction of the flow and mirrors the flow of the water down the valley. And you see this all the time, where there's a kind of a dialogue, a conversation between the green vegetation and the flowing water. Everything is connected, so the stones and the rocks responding to the water, and so too is all the vegetation. So it's a very dynamic conversation between different elements of nature. I like this because it's quite an intimate little corner. It's perhaps a bit more shaded and out of the way. It isn't in the main stream. It's a little tributary running off to one side, creating a little pool, a little bit overexposed on the water at the bottom. Probably too much overall exposure, but I like it because it's quite intimate. It's like a little fairy pool off to one side. Again, we might have seen that one before, or a similar one, standing in the stream, looking at the water heading straight for you. Now this is just picking up that idea of delicacy and power together. Those strands dangling down on the left-hand side of the frame were dancing around quite energetically in the flow of the water, the water was almost bouncing down the valley, which you get that impression with the slightly long exposure of 2 seconds. The water is sort of hitting the rocks and then bouncing up, which you get to see by way of the photograph. This is another one looking quite close to the edge. You can see the path up Heber's Ghyll on the right-hand side, just creeping into shot there. But the interest in this one is the way the water splays out as it snakes down. You can see it snaking down from the top left, and then it bursts out as a sort of a fan of water on that image there, which is what I like. Again, this is a combination of the vegetation just leaning out over the water. It's almost as if the ferns are going to fall in. It's like a child getting close to the edge, leaning out. You can see a stick again, just caught in the flow there. But this is a very turbulent scene when the water was really powering down Heber's Ghyll. tremendous power there, which I think is a really attractive feature, but offset by the delicacy and the stillness of that fern there, which I think makes the shot, if we just seen just all power, it wouldn't have been as effective. And right in the middle you can see some little silvery threads of water coming down. So there's a lot in that photograph, but each element, I think, complements the other elements. So this was just taken on a mobile phone, and again, because it was a quick shot, I was able to just to wade into the water and hold the phone just a few inches above the water, just to get those reflections. But really the initial interest was that stone right in the middle and the way it was reflected in the pool of water. But then I really began to appreciate the amazing variety of colours. Of course, you might describe a colour as green, but there are so many different types of green and blue and other colours. It's almost possible to describe without actually seeing. So that was just a quick shot with a phone, which I think was really, really nice. These are some other images from around Heber's Ghyll Wood. And the lesson in this one, taken with the twin lens reflex camera, hence the square format, was just taking a picture directly into the sunlight. And I love the way the ferns capture the sunlight. And if you look closely, there's a little spider's web thread just running through the image. I love the soft focus of these. Quite tricky to get the focus on the ferns, but that's one of the things about medium format photography, is that you get a very shallow depth of field, so you have to be very, very careful about the focus. But shooting into the light here works really well. And again, blurry backgrounds, it gives you the opportunity to isolate some of the interest in the foreground. So these are some regular shots taken with a regular digital camera of the path running up. It's north facing, as I say, and if you go out in the morning, often there's a mist, so it's well worth going when it's misty. A variation on the previous shot. Again, you can see the abundance of moss on the rocks, which always make it quite interesting. It's quite a messy wood, lots of dead wood, but I like it because it's not manicured, it's very natural, it's very old, and there are there's lots of nature there essentially. This was an early morning shot in the mist. Again, one of those pictures that you shoot towards the light. I love shooting towards the light, just to capture that backlighting that makes for a very atmospheric shot. This was taken just on a mobile phone, very quick. But in a photograph, there's always a need to be very clear about what the subject is, isn't there, and what the photograph is about. And really, that's about these sawn-off logs in the foreground. What you make of it is that really there's human beings in the wood doing things and taking care of them in various ways, hopefully. And the colours, the higher up you go, the more bracken you get. So moving up towards the edge of the moor, you begin to get more of this bracken creeping in to the woods. And there it is decaying and creating these incredible reds. And this final image is really when you emerge at the top of Heber's Ghyll, especially if you go up really bright and early. The sun comes up from the other side of the woods and through the woods, backlighting those trees, which I think gives an amazing picture. Well, that's the walk, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and it's given you an insight into Heber's Ghyll Wood and Black Beck, and what I think is the value of slow photography, taking your time, looking to see the details in the scene, planning how you're going to frame the shot, and producing something that you can be really proud of, but also really that reminds you that at the time of taking the photograph, you were really very well connected with nature and really used your eyes a lot to see what was there. Well, thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me on another virtual photo walk sometime soon.